So I want to talk about addiction, which really is a substance use medical disorder. In our country, we know that millions of people suffer from substance use disorder and the misuse of drugs. Yet still, there's a huge stigma with it. And in large part, it's because it's really a complex disorder. When we think about addiction, it's defined in many different ways as a compulsive disorder, a disorder of chronic drug seeking, despite all of the harmful consequences. But it's also characterized medically. So there's a substance use disorder diagnostic criteria that have to be met, and individuals will be categorized based on the degree of their control of their substance use, how it impacts their life, their risky use of the substance, and whether or not they may even have tolerance and withdrawal from these substances. So there are clinical metrics for diagnosing substance use disorder. The thing is that substance use disorders are very similar to other chronic disorders. When you think about chronic disorders like diabetes, hypertension, one of the things that they're known for is their relapsing aspects. The same for substance use disorder. We know that these chronic disorders, many of them are preventable. They lead to biological changes relevant to their chronic conditions. They're also treatable. And if untreated, it can lead to lifetime challenges. When we think about substance use disorders, also many people may think of it as disorders of morality and so on. But it's a disorder of the brain. It's a disorder when people may use a drug, their transmitters in their brain will change. Often people think about the neurotransmitter dopamine because drug use will increase dopamine that is associated with the euphoria, the high. And when dopamine levels go down, there is a dysphoria. But the neurobiology is much more complex than that. We have a lot of knowledge about what substance use disorder brain changes relate to. So for example, it's not just dopamine. There are many neurotransmitters and in fact, substance use disorders, I consider them a whole brain disorder. We know, for example, different parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, which is really critical for decision-making, inhibitory control. In substance use disorder, that brain region is compromised such that their decision-making and inhibitory control is reduced. Instead, you have brain regions such as the nucleus accumbens, which is associated often with reward, goal-directed behaviors. That is increase in activity during substance use such that there is increased reward drive. There's also changes in brain regions such as the amygdala. It's really important for emotional regulation and drug memories and craving. And so those brain regions you can see are associated with increased craving, increased drug memories. That is a key part of the neurobiological changes that we see in substance use disorder. But when you think about substance use disorder and the brain, it's not a static disorder. As said before, substance use disorder, like many chronic disorders, are preventable. And we know that the risk of substance use disorders actually starts early in life, for example. There are neurodevelopmental factors that impact on the risk and vulnerability for substance use disorders. The environmental factors such as stress, trauma, and even early drug exposure during prenatal and early life can lead to long-term changes in vulnerability. Genetics also plays a role in substance use disorder risk, impacting on neural structures, neurotransmitters that are relevant to increasing reward vulnerability or enhancing stress reactivity. And all of these together impacts on the behavioral traits such as reward sensitivity, anxiety, depression, impulsivity, inhibitory control, that all together impacts on neurobiological systems that are relevant to increasing substance use risk. So substance use disorders are very complex, and these neurobiological systems, such as I said, the dopamine, other transmitters such as our endogenous opioid transmitters, such as serotonin, these transmitters are important for mood and regulation, the glutamatergic transmitters that are important for brain excitability. These are all targets of substance use and the chronic effects of substance use disorders. But a common thread for a lot of the neurotransmitters and the neural circuits that are impacted by substance use disorders is the aspect of stress. As I said earlier, early life stress impacts on addiction vulnerability, but so too are the daily stressors that impacts on these neural circuits that are also critical for substance use disorders. So again, a complex disorder. We've learned a lot about the neurobiology, but clearly there are interacting factors from the environment, genetics, and yes, the substance use that places individuals at risk, and also for why certain individuals have a very challenging time just quote unquote stopping, because these neural changes are there for a very long time. But the good news is that when we study the brain, we realize that a number of the neurobiological systems that are impacted with substance use disorders, they are mediated by what we call epigenetic factors. They're meaning that it's not the DNA that you inherit from your parents, but the environment that can turn on and off genes that allow us to be plastic, the brain to be plastic. So it means that they are reversible. And so the treatments can work for substance use disorders like they work for other chronic disorders.